Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 4 of Be With Me, 7 Minutes of Biblical Wonder. And I'm going to tell you my salvation verse today and my salvation story today, and they're very intimately involved. Here's the verse. This is John, Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 12. Here it is. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Now there's a comma at the end of that, and we'll get to the rest of it, but I want to tell you the first part first. Now, if I was paying more attention, I might have realized that something was happening, but if I knew that this was going to be such an important day, I would have paid more attention. I would have circled it on my calendar. I would have recorded what happened. I would have known more. I would have documented who was there and what my memories were. But I got saved by surprise. There was no countdown, at least. I'm sure there was in heaven or something, but for me it was sudden and unexpected, surprising, like shocking, like I woke up with no clue that this was going to happen, and I went to bed as a proclaimed believer. So I don't even remember the guy preaching on this verse. I went to a baptism. A friend was getting baptized. And this must have been the verse that the guy was preaching on, because this has been noted in my Bible and underlined as my salvation verse. But when you go see a baptism, the gospel is definitely proclaimed, and I probably heard the gospel and made my decision, and we'll talk about my decision and God's movement all at the same time. So here's my salvation verse, John 1:12, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So I would have said I was a Christian at the time. I certainly came from a faith tradition. I knew stuff about Jesus. I had lots of exposure. I sang in a choir at one time. But this whole thing about receiving and believing, what does that mean? I think it means accepting with belief and my consent and my agreement. Now, here's what I agreed to. Number one, that I was a sinner. That, for a lot of people, that's a deal breaker right there, because I don't like to look at myself that way. Secondly, that there is a just penalty for sin. And then thirdly, that there is sort of a fix. There's a remedy that can be accessed by your belief and then something else, which we'll talk about in a second. So I'm reminded of what Knute Larson's fourth grade education grandmother said. This door that you go through, on one side is a decision, on the other side is election. And on the doorpost on the outside, it says, whosoever wills can come. And on the inside of the doorpost, after you go through, you turn around and look back, and it says, chosen before the foundation of the earth. Very similarly, I think this verse describes the first doorpost for me, which is the front of the door, which is, but to all who did receive him. Verse 12, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name. As if my choice was everything, and then I go through that door, and it talks about being born of God. So here's the part of the verse that follows the comma. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, comma, who were born not of blood or the will of the flesh, that'd be my part, nor of the will of man, but of God, period. So here's the God part. So you heard that I had to consent to the sinner part and penalty part and remedy part. Well, God's not a sinner. He's holy. He is not a penalty giver. He's a penalty, he sucks up other people's penalty. And then the remedy, he's the one that provides the remedy. So on my doorpost, this verse 12 is, but to all who received him. And as I go through with my belief and my action and my faith and my trust, I look back and I also find out that now I was born of God. So this is, so far above my pay grade. And again, I want to emphasize, I didn't plan on this. I didn't mean to become a Christian. And I certainly didn't mean to become a Christian on that day. I mean, who makes a list that says, Okay, today I want you to read a chapter of this book. I want remember to practice the piano. You got to pay the bills and become a Christian on the things to do list. I mean, does anybody know that does anybody wake up and say, today's the day that I'm probably going to become a Christian? No, I think most people are gobsmacked by grace and goodness and access, and the fact that we even get to sort of participate with our little puny part of this, where something has been going on before the foundations of the earth, according to Knute's grandmother, and according to the scripture here, being born of God, something that is impossible. So there's this necessity that you have to be born again. How can you do that? That's in John chapter 4. But it's impossible. So God is saying, yeah, you got to do something. It's absolutely necessary that you do something. And oh, by the way, it's impossible. What you have to do is impossible. You can't pay for your sin. You can't do this alone. And you have to receive something that has been birthed in the heavenlies before the foundation of the earth. So here's my verse. John 1:12 and 13. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. So today, if you're a believer, wouldn't it be great if you just appreciated and were grateful and were remembering the impossible thing that God did to you, took your heart of stone, turned it into flesh? I mean, without his activity, we just can't even do this. So I think that yields to worship. And for me, remembering this, even though I knew about God, even though I had exposure to God, this whole receiving thing and accepting and agreeing with him, that for me was the hurdle that I had to get over. This, for me to consent that I was a sinner and I had a penalty and needed remedy, was just too wild. So today, if that's you, who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want to be chosen by God? Who wouldn't want to be part of his family? If so, prepare for a surprise, because nobody plans on this, and maybe it's today and maybe it's at the end of this podcast. Here's what you do. You say, Lord, I believe. Lord, I receive. Lord, I yield. Lord, I agree that I'm a sinner and that I need help and that there's a penalty, a righteous penalty, and you are the remedy for that penalty. I thank you for listening and sharing with me my salvation story and my salvation verse. May you walk with God today. I'll see you tomorrow.